Our first discussion, a technical committee of the influential OPEC Plus producers coalition has made no recommendations to change the group's existing production policy in the latest meeting. Global oil demand is set to rise by 1.9 million barrels per day in 2023 to a record 101.7 million barrels per day, with nearly half the grain from China following the lifting of its COVID restrictions. Questions have risen whether prospective increase in Chinese demand, the world's largest crude oil importer, which is now suffering the strict COVID-19 restrictions that led its purchases throughout most of last year, could push the Producers Alliance to raise their output. Joining me now to provide solutions to this and, of course, discuss issues around the energy space, he is an energy lawyer and an analyst, Dr. Ayodele Oni. Dr. Oni, thank you so much for joining us on the program. It's good to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me.
First, I would like you to do a review of what you make of the present OPEC's decision on production output. How does this come to you? Do you think that is the way to go, particularly at this time where energy prices seems to remain on the high side across the board?
Yeah, well, saying there's no change means that they believe reducing quotas means that it'd be a disservice to OPEC members in particular and members of the OPEC Plus, the 10 or so countries, which used to be 11 until Equatorial Guinea then joined OPEC. I think for them, it's market forces of demand and supply. So it means that the demand is still high and it's going to continue to either increase or stay as it is. And from what you did mention moments ago, demand is going to increase. And I think it's a cartel. And cartels like to determine output and prices. And for them, it's also about profitability. So ultimately, as long as you continue to have that cooperation between OPEC and the OPEC Plus countries, particularly under their declaration of cooperation, which, by the way, should be in place till the end of this year, I think that cooperation is to ensure that things remain profitable for those countries. Ultimately, I think concerns around the world is secondary as far as they are concerned. They want to be profitable. They want to make money. That's why when there's a glut and prices go down, they would ask countries to increase production, to reduce production rather. But when you find out that it's the reverse, then they would also do otherwise. So I think in this case, they either see that demand is going to remain as it is or it's going to increase. That's why they've done what they've done.
But I see the U.S. now also opening up reserves. I think that was yesterday or something, saying that they would open their reserves anytime soon. Considering the Russian and Ukraine crisis, that's a two-in-one question. What does that mean if they open up their reserves? And what other effect is the Russian-Ukraine crisis having around the crude oil market? Any impact more at the moment? Yes, we saw that hike in the price of gas and all of that in recent times. But what's been playing out along that angle?
Okay, interesting question. And interestingly, gas has been increasing more recently and crude has dropped slightly. I think currently Brent is around $86 per barrel, and the Western Texan intermediate is around $79, $80. So I think that Russia is more gas than crude. However, for the US, as long as you have this in mind, you bear this in mind, this fact in mind, that OPEC does control at least 40% of the market share. And if you now also consider the cooperating countries under the Declaration of Cooperation, that's the additional 10 countries, which I said is to be 11, you'd see that they control a large part of the market. What the US seeks to do is to do one of two things: break their ranks or ensure that when there's more crude available, and like I said, market forces of demand and supply, when there's more crude, prices can then go down. They may be forced, but the way I expect OPEC to react is probably to reduce output, and when output is reduced, the prices will either remain as they are or go up. So I doubt that one country alone will make a significant change in terms of what we see going on. With respect to crude, to Russia, Ukraine, that's been responsible for high energy or played a significant role in the high energy prices we see. And when you speak to energy, you speak beyond just crude. You look at gas, you look at everything else that you need for production, fuel, generally speaking. Because, for example, Russia does produce anywhere from 30% or make available anywhere from 30 to 45, 60% of the gas used in Europe. It then means that um, sanctions and even Russia saying they were going to, at some point, reduce gas availability. It means that energy prices would remain high generally. And you'd see that from gas. I think natural gas prices increased by anywhere from 2.8% to about 4% daily in the last few days. So I think that those factors would interplay with respect to gas on one hand and with respect to crude. And I think what the US seeks to do will have an impact, but that impact will not be significant because I expect OPEC to respond or react.
Well, let's come back home where we're yet to meet up with our quota, which OPEC has given us. We are struggling, of course, no thanks to vandalism and all of that, which we think that is being addressed at the moment based on the efforts being put in by the likes of the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited. But the NMDPRA is coming up with a database now to cover crude oil inventory. What positives do you think this brings to the entire market?
Well, covering inventory, providing data only sort of validates what you have available. If you do not have inventory, then you do not have inventory. If you do have inventory, and that would be for me more from a petroleum products point of view than even crude, it wouldn't solve the problem. It would only let us know if there is hoarding and those other market distorting activities. Beyond that, I do not see that it will make a substantial change to what we currently have. What you may then see is a situation where the upstream commission and the authority work hand in hand from both a crude oil reporting availability data point of view and petroleum products, so that issues around unavailable or non-availability of petroleum products, particularly PMS, what we call petrol, will subside. I'm not sure that would be substantial in the first place, but it's a possibility that when both parties work, you then know that, oh, we have this much volume of crude, or we have this much volume of petroleum products. Then the question is, or this much inventory. The question then is, why isn't it available? I think that's a question we then need to answer.
A big question there, begging for answers. But let's move on, staying home. Now we have to refine our crude. We send it out, we refine, we bring it back, and we have to spend a lot in this process. Before we come down to what comes into the country, how much we pay, how much we are paying at the pumps, the issue of refining comes to my mind. And we see a lot of efforts around refining at the moment. And I think that pressure is even down now. Everyone used to talk about Dangote refinery. That was the talk everywhere. But right now, the federal government is also trying to revitalize some of its strategic refineries, well, some are saying that's not the way to go. In your thoughts, what are the positives of refining in country? That is really what I want to understand today. We've got a lot of submissions from analysts like you, but basically, what do you think? How will it work or go well for us if we totally domesticate refining?
Okay, you take away the interesting thing refining locally is that first, because crude is an international commodity, if the international prices are high, unless the government interferes in the market, petroleum products prices too will be high because it's an international commodity and it's USD based. Unless, of course, government does intervene. Intervention could be that government says, okay, I have 20% equity in a Dangote refinery, for example. That my 20% equity, I want it dealt with in naira. I want it sold. Government can intervene in that sense. Outside of intervention, the only thing refining locally does is to take away some cost which importation will ordinarily impose. Some of these costs include freight, insurance, what they call STS, ship to ship. So, and the way ship to ship does work is that you have larger vessels, they will then need to evacuate their petroleum products in smaller vessels because of issues around water height, depth, dredging, all of those. So you remove about 7 costs because you refine locally. And I expect that the price would be, say, 20-25% at the most cheaper. Some would argue 15.5, 17% maximum, depending on what data and other factors. I think that's what refining locally does. That's when you do not, when you remove subsidy. But if you refine locally and you don't remove subsidy, what then happens is that it will still be challenging, but it cuts off logistic problems we have now and makes it overall cheaper for government. So subsidy government will be paying will be cheaper. That's what local refining does. It doesn't mean that prices will go down by 50% or even 40% or anything. It only means that it'll be slightly cheaper and availability should no longer be a problem because you are refining what you produce, particularly if you refine sufficiently. And of course, you can also debate our balance of trade and balance of payment. Now, what do this mean? The balance of trade, balance of payment generally is slightly different, but it means when you sell internationally versus when you buy, what's the difference? Do you make more money? So you sell your crude for $1 billion. You now have to buy back finished product for 1.2 billion. You are in a deficit. Your balance of trade, balance of payment is in a deficit because you are spending $200 million more. But if we are not buying petroleum products internationally, it then means that it would improve, at least as far as petroleum products and crude is concerned, our balance of trade and balance of payment can improve and can even be positive as far as those products are concerned. And if you look at it overall, globally, from a Nigerian perspective, it will generally improve because I understand that petroleum products play a substantial percentage or volume of value in our trading, generally speaking. So that's what refining locally will do. Improve availability, reduce your cost, not necessarily that substantially, because crude is an international commodity, unless government does intervene in one or more ways. That's when you can then have a substantial reduction. And of course, that then goes to whether you want to remove subsidy or not. But should make it easier to remove subsidy when you refine locally. Of course, there are 2 or 3 other factors that I think are important before you begin to talk about the complete removal of subsidy. So I'll leave it at that.
Interesting stuff. Great clarity there, clarification from you regards to what that really means. So before I let you go, there are a lot of talks around climate change, and many will say that there's this gradual shift away from fossil fuel. But some will argue that a country like us, Nigeria, and some other African countries, do you think we are ready to take advantage of this of this clean energy at this moment? Or do we still need to just keep getting what we're getting from oil and gas and build ahead of the green energy or the green environment?
Okay, first, we'll start with what government's policy is. Government is working towards a gas-centric economic growth.
Yes.
That's why the year 2021 to 2030 is the decade of gas. That's what Nigeria is doing. And you'd have to take into consideration there are different debates around going green, net zero, and all of that. Many people will tell you that almost every product you see, even if it's even my laptop that I'm currently using, it's from fossil fuels. Green energy cannot produce, you need your raw materials, plastic and all of that, come from fossil fuels. So, in my own view, fossil fuels will not go completely. Now, in terms of its influence will wane over time. But I think for gas, you've still got another 30 to 50 years. You'll still play a substantial role because one, there's a need to spend a lot of money, billions of dollars every year, particularly in developing countries, to be able to achieve all of the net zero reduction in emissions or having net zero, going green, and all of that. And the Western world is not ready to spend that much. Also, you need to take into consideration the politics of going green. You notice that with the Russia-Ukraine challenge, some countries were even going back to coal. Germany was having that conversation. France, some of those countries were having that conversation, talking about nuclear, going back to coal, to show you that energy debates, energy politics is about interest. So I think as long as we can push for our own interest, we can have an Africa or African-centric policy, and maybe work more with countries in Asia. We will still have a market for our crude, and we still have much more for gas. So whilst we do that, we should keep an eye, of course, so that we have a robust energy mix. We've got solar radiation is strong in some parts of Nigeria. We can do wind, we can do hydro. So a good mix is always a good idea, but I am not one of those to jump on the bandwagon and say that fossil fuels will be going any moment from now. Yes, there will be improvement in technology to be able to achieve a net zero effect, such that you can have more emissions trapped, or a reduction in emissions, which is what countries like Australia are looking to achieve, much more than saying we phase out hydrocarbons. So I think that it's debatable. No one can really determine what will happen because no one saw the Russia challenge that we see today. No one believed that some countries in Europe could go back to coal or begin to have conversations around coal. Because even when you have the debate around clean coal technology, people would say, some people, particularly in Europe, would say coal can never be clean, even when you say clean coal technology. So energy policy issues, it's a lot of politics, it's a lot of selfish interest and vested interest, self-serving generally. So net zero and all of that are important, but I think we should continue to make the most of our gas, the most of our oil, particularly in this time where there's a lot of need for it. You see Europe having conversations to see how they can even support us in terms of infrastructure so that we can be alternatives to Russia. So I think for the next 10, 20 years, let's do the much we can around crude, for another 30, 40, 50 years around gas, whilst also still keeping an eye on green energy. That's my view. I take a middle position.
Interesting.
I wouldn't be extreme to say that's it. Yeah.
Interesting. I think I want to align with that. And it's on that note that we wrap up this conversation. Dr. Ayodele Oni, I must thank you so much for your brilliant contributions on the program today. Thank you so much. Do enjoy the rest of your day. Dr. Ayodele Oni is an energy lawyer. He's also an analyst.
Thank you very much.
All right then.